Remember when QWERTY phones, especially BlackBerries, were the darlings of the smartphone industry, the favorite form factor of elite corporate weapons everywhere in the 2000s? Nowadays, QWERTY phones are mostly dead. We killed them in favor of these rectangular slabs, which are growing by the year. BlackBerry's last model, the Key 2, was released in 2018. That's 6 years ago. And they're probably never going to release a phone ever again, at least not under their original company. But there's one company still producing and selling QWERTY phones brand new, Unihertz. Unihertz is a brand known for still producing smartphones in unconventional form factors. They're probably most known for two lines, their Jelly line, which is basically miniature smartphones, and their Titan line, which is their QWERTY keyboard line. Now, I've been using the Titan Pocket for the past month, and here's my review. Now, I'm reviewing this from the point of view of someone who wishes to reduce their overall screen time. Not really someone who wants to be a phone power user. I'll just tell you now that if you want a legitimately good Android phone that just happens to have a physical keyboard, this might not be the best option. But the problem is, what alternatives are there out there anyway? Now, this phone is really small dimensions-wise. Here it is side by side with a Google Pixel 7a, but it feels pretty chunky, and visually, it's a BlackBerry clone. Now, visually, it touts itself as a rugged phone, and it has all of the markers of being such. But in practice, not really. It's not water resistant or dust resistant at all, which is a shame compared to the original larger Titan, which had those characteristics. And as you can see, it's already a bit dinged up. I did not want to shell some extra money for the case. So there's a few scratches here and there. The screen is a 3-inch square 720p display, and whether or not you consider this a bug or a feature, app developers don't really build for this aspect ratio anymore. So the end result is that things are pretty squished, YouTube videos don't display at full size. All in all, this contributes to this not being an addictive media consumption device. Now, what about more functional apps? Google Maps still actually works for turn-by-turn navigation, but because it's sort of squished vertically, you can't really see that far ahead of you on the road, so you do need to be a bit more alert and actually just pay attention to what the voice is saying or what the next turn will be, rather than sort of seeing like a larger mini map beside you as you're driving. Now, perhaps owing to its not so great and large screen, the battery life is actually really good. I can get 2 full days here without going for a charge. And I'm pretty sure this is not that hard to replace battery-wise if you wanted to, because on the back, there are screws. Like, when's the last time you've had a phone with visible screws? Now, on the top here, you have a headphone jack. Yes, that is a feature now in 2024, and an IR blaster. On the back is a single camera, and on the lower part here is a single backfiring speaker. In terms of the material on the back, it's part metal and part this rubbery plastic, which I am not a fan of in general, because this means that over time this will get really sticky. The metal back is in the shape of an H. I wonder if that's just referring to H as in Hertz as in Unihertz. And in terms of the speaker, it's actually quite loud, as you'll hear here. The problem is that when you sit it flush on a table, or even when you're holding it, it's really easy to block and muffle the speaker sound. I'm just not a huge fan of the placement, but you're not here for the speaker or the camera. You're here for the keyboard. Let's talk about the keyboard. The keyboard is a full QWERTY keyboard, and it takes a bit of time to get used to. I'm actually amazed at how much muscle memory we've been able to develop over the past decade. I'm able to type on a regular smartphone at like 60 to 70 words per minute now. But here on this QWERTY keyboard, I'm averaging at around 40 words per minute. And initially I was doing like 10 to 20. It feels good, but I'm actually less efficient when typing. Now, part of the reason for this learning curve is the layout. You'll sort of see here some strange decisions. Your shift keys and your modifier keys are actually on the top row, and then the space bar is nestled between the V and the B keys, which is very different from a normal keyboard. And that's probably why it took me so long to actually adapt to this, despite it being, in theory, a more tactile, easy to use keyboard. Anyway, here's how the keys sound if you're curious. Now, I don't have a BlackBerry on me, but how does that sound? Or if you've actually owned both, how does it feel compared to a normal BlackBerry? Let me know down in the comments. Now, with all of these physical buttons, I do like the programmability of these buttons. There's a pretty high degree of customizability in terms of what you can do with them. Like, for example, there's this red button here. Pressing and holding it will give you a torch, which is really handy because you can do this even when the phone's locked. And then what I do as well is a single click of that red button opens up the camera, but you can also set any of these keys to actually perform an action. Like, I don't have that many apps on here, but for example, if I press and hold the letter S from the home screen, it will actually open up Slack. And the other cool thing is that you can set up the keyboard itself. It sort of becomes a bit of a trackpad and you can set it up to scroll. The middle button is the fingerprint reader, which is okay. Sometimes it finds it difficult to read my fingerprint, but it's fine. The annoying thing is that by default, if you press it a single time, it'll go back to home. And with all of these other keys around it and below it, it's very easy to accidentally press the home button as you're typing something. So what I've actually done is I've set the home button to be a double press to go to home instead of a single press, and that sort of fixed that for me. Speaking of the camera, I'm not sure if you were expecting anything different, but it's a bit of a potato. But it's so much of a potato that it's now got this sort of vintage digicam look to it, which are now popular with the kids. These sort of give off that vibe, like traveling back in time to a decade ago. Now, objectively, it's not a great camera, but nostalgia is a hell of a drug. So I actually kind of see the charm in it. It's fine in daylight, it actually looks kind of good, but in nighttime or in darker settings, it's really hard to actually see anything. The details just get lost. Now for the video quality, I'm actually gonna show you. So if you're wondering why I look like a lumberjack, it's because I'm going out on a hike today. I am going to be using this Titan Pocket as my primary camera for both stills and video, just so you can see the quality in an outdoor, semi-well-lit setting. As you can see, there's not much in terms of image stabilization or noise cancelling here. So yeah, that's a bit of a showcase of the video capability of this phone. What do you guys think? It sort of reminds me of those old flip cameras. Again, objectively not great, but it sort of triggers some nostalgia in me, which I find quite charming. Now let's move to the software a bit. And before we proceed, if you've liked this video so far, I would appreciate a thumbs up, and a subscribe would be even better. Let's talk about the software. I feel like this is where this will be a deal breaker for a lot of you. This is still running Android 11, and the last security update was from 2022. And this is still being sold brand new by Unihertz. So I'm not a huge fan of that sort of setup, to be honest. By the way, can any of you security experts please let me know the risks of running a smartphone with a security update from 2022? Anyway, let's talk about the launcher first. I initially didn't like the launcher because initially it was set default to behave like an iOS launcher where all of the apps were visible and you needed to scroll through everything. But I realized that that was a setting that you could actually change, and you could sort of go to a more modern Android launcher where you had a home screen and then the whole app drawer is separate to it. But that was a very confusingly named setting. Now, a launcher and organization matters because this thing just comes with so much bloatware. Like, look at all of this stuff that you don't really need. And annoyingly, it's not something you can uninstall. Now, probably if you're a bit more technical, you can figure this out because this is Android after all. But for me, I just hide them and keep them out of sight. Overall though, for basic tasks, I feel that this phone is actually pretty snappy, and it sort of speaks to like how much modern smartphones have developed over time. Like 10-15 years ago, if you bought something that was a third or a fourth of the price of a flagship, you would definitely feel it even for basic tasks. Whereas now, I can just go through all of my basic tasks like messaging, light social media, taking videos, taking photos. Those all just happen without any issues, even with something as old as Android 11 in 2024. That said, there are a lot of annoying small things that happen sometimes with this phone. Sometimes the touchscreen, especially on the corners, doesn't respond, and that could be because of how it squishes all of the apps to a weird aspect ratio, and maybe it's the app that isn't really responding well to this form factor. But either way, that's the end result. Sometimes, even though I've put in a custom launcher, it'll just go back default to the default launcher. And that's why I've actually been running more with a default launcher these days, because the phone sort of wants me to go there anyway.
Just froze again as I was just browsing through the Play Store. That's kind of annoying.
Something really annoying that I haven't figured out, the keyboard, it is backlit, but it will only light up if you press something. Therefore, it means you will inevitably screw up one letter when you're typing something in the dark. And the annoying thing is that I feel like these criticisms are moot because this will never get an update anyway. But that, I guess, comes with the territory of buying a phone that's 3 years old from a manufacturer that isn't really known to provide regular software updates. And this is where we get into a bit of a rant, because I do wish that a company, whether it be Unihertz or not, could just take the QWERTY keyboard form factor a bit more seriously. The problem with having no competition is that they're not really incentivized to really make this better. And I guess there's just not big of a market enough for them to really care, because if there was a big market for this, then they would take it seriously because the dollars would be flowing. Or, Unihertz, just try to build something that could last a bit longer term. Like, if this phone received a few more years of Android updates, this would be amazing. I feel like this company is just focused on creating phones that would grab headlines or would be good for YouTube. Just phones that would get talked about, rather than phones that would be useful and could stand the test of time. Now, despite that mini rant, I just can't deny that this phone's actually working for me. Like, it's successful at having reduced my screen time to around half of what it was before when I was using a more traditional smartphone. And it's just the right balance of friction and usefulness. Like, the fact that I can still install all of my apps that I need for communicating and also for work is a really good sign. But the screen size is small enough and honestly crappy enough where it's not really addictive as an all-in-one media consumption device, and I'm instead just diverting to a more traditional, less distracting form factor like a television. It's so annoying at certain things that I am not really incentivized to keep using it, but it's not so useless that I feel crippled. Like, it still has NFC, it still has digital payments, it can still scan QR codes. But for the price and the fact that it's running really old software, if you really want to try it, please buy this used, because you're just incentivizing Unihertz to continue with this really bad one-and-done support. Like, this is already 3 years old. The software is still Android 11. The last security update's from 2022, and it only has 4G and not 5G. But they still have the gall to settle this brand new on their website. I just really can't in good faith recommend this as a fully functional phone for the long term, unless you're trying to be like me and wanting to reduce their overall screen time using a phone that's just okay. Or you just really want to have fun and you just want to try out a QWERTY keyboard. Or if you just want to be a bit different, because this does invite a lot of questions. No one's ever asked about my Google Pixel 7a. A lot of people have asked me about this at work. And one more thing, which I have not experienced because I'm out in the US, apparently this does not work with certain US networks. So just know that there is some network compatibility issues in here, and please do your own research. But overall, for me, even though this ends on a bit of a negative note, it is working for me in terms of my digital minimalism goals. And if you're interested in learning about that whole experiment and what I've been up to, click on this video right here.